Good evening, everybody. This is Arun here, and on a wet, cold October evening during a pandemic, and I'm going to be talking to you today about a dental practice startup, doing a dental practice startup during a pandemic. Now, we've had a lot of people join this webinar. I'm just going to try and find my colleague, Dan, to make sure the technology works. Dan, are you there? Hopefully he can talk. Hi, Dan.
How you doing?
I'm good. Right, we got the technology working. Fantastic. How are you?
Yeah, good.
How are you this evening?
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Right. So tonight, we're going to be talking about doing a dental practice startup during a pandemic. It'll probably last about 30 to 40 minutes. Dan will be talking a little bit about the financing shortly. I will mute you for the moment, Dan, because of feedback. So don't worry, I'll bring you in.
Yeah, no problem.
And let's crack on. Okay, so I'm sure you've got lots of questions. This is a subject that I know very well, and I've been in the dental sector for so long that I know it inside out. But I've tried to make it relevant to what's going on in the current marketplace and the current world now. Excuse me. So hopefully these slides will work. Right. For those of you who have never attended a webinar that I've done before, my name's Arun. I'm the owner and CEO of Samera Business Advisors. We've been going 18 years. If you hadn't seen us on social media in the last week, I'll be surprised. We've been celebrating our 18 years quite prolifically across there, thanks to some of my team of Chris, Nikita, and others getting us out there. I'm also the co-owner of the Dentistry Dental Group with my wife, Smita. We have practices in Surrey and London. I've been working now with dentists for 18 years, not 17 years. I need to update that slide. I'm a trained chartered accountant with PwC London and an ex-banker previous to that with Bank of America. But more relevant, more to everybody who's attending tonight is, what about squats? You're going to talk about squats. What have you been involved in over the last 17, 18 years? So myself, with my wife, Smita, we have started 5 squats of our own, 5 dental practices from scratch, with our own money, time, bank money, and all the headaches that come with it, but also all the rewards that come with it. And the first one was back in 2004. Then we did one that's in Wandsworth Town, and that was the one we probably had made our first bunch of mistakes on. Then we did one in 2006 in Canary Wharf, right in the middle of the shopping centre. We sold that in 2013 to Bupa. We've got the Esher one that started in 2010, and that's where I'm sitting in the offices of my office, which is here in Esher at the moment, Surrey. Then Fleet Street in 2015 and Notting Hill Gate in 2017. And currently now we still own the Wandsworth and Esher sites. And in addition to neem trees, I was kind of trying to do some sums earlier today, and I must have worked with over 75 sites across the UK over the last 17, 18 years, maybe even more, okay? Many have been very successful and are long-standing clients of ours. Those that haven't done so well thought it would be easier. And I'm just going to make this very evident and everything clear to everybody here today, is that starting a squat is very feasible, it's very doable, but it's not for everybody, okay? Hopefully that will come clear as we get through this series of slides this evening. It can be a very exciting journey, it can be very rewarding, and it can be very creative, but also if you don't have the commercial sense or the commercial acumen or perhaps the commercial desire, then maybe it's not the right thing for you, but we'll talk about that later. So just a few pictures. This is our first site that we did back in 2004. This is in Wandsworth Town. This was the original branding, and this is where we made plenty of mistakes. So one mistake that comes to mind is we opened up, great location, near a station, but we kitted out the whole surgery top to toe with the fanciest equipment and the fanciest look. And half the equipment wasn't even used for maybe 18 months, 2 years. One of the rooms we kitted out, it was just sat there gathering dust. So we spent 50, 60 grand unnecessarily just for no reason. So that was one mistake we certainly made on that side. Okay. Then, so the learning point there was very evidently, don't kit out 2 rooms straight away unless you think there's going to be demand. And we had no idea. We were very green, very clueless. And I suppose the other mistake, or not mistake, but one of the issues we faced at that point in time there was that Smita, my wife, was also pregnant with our first child. So, and she was going to be the main dentist. So that kind of threw a curveball at us at that time. Our second site was actually Canary Wharf in the malls, and that was right next door to Barclays Bank. And cracking location, cracking practice, very busy at the time. I imagine if we had a practice there now, we'd probably be out of business because there's no one working in Canary Wharf now as a result of the pandemic. But I suppose you take the good with the bad. It was a very busy practice and really kind of a pioneer of its time at that time. So we were very privileged to run and own that. I suppose the big mistake, not mistake, but the big learning point there when we were dealing with a landlord like Canary Wharf, it was difficult. They had very high expectations, very demanding. And so the cost of kitting out this clinic was astronomical because of all the fire safety issues and all these things that we hadn't really encountered in Wandsworth before. Was a learning curve for us. We set up in 2006, and in 2013 we actually exited and sold that to Bupa. I believe now it's not a dental practice. Last time I saw it, it was a Ted Baker's grooming salon. So Bupa, I think, consolidated all their clinics into one large clinic in that area once they bought us out. Then in 2010, this is where I'm sitting upstairs in those windows, one of those rooms. This is our Esher site. Esher's down in Surrey, a nice part of the world. And this site, we bought a freehold and we had to gut it and completely transform it. I suppose, the lingering memory from this site is that when we bought the building, it was a December in 2009, we got a call from the police. Did you know there's a man living in the shed at the back? Okay, which was a real shock to us. So we then went down in the snow. It was freezing cold. Went to this shed, and there was lo and behold, it was a very sad story. A man sitting there in the shed, and he'd set up his own little place to live. So he had a sink, he had an oven, he had a bed. None of the sink or the oven or anything was plugged into anything, but it looked like his home. So it was a kind of a middle-aged Italian man who'd obviously got some mental health issues, and so we had to find housing for him, find care for him, and eventually he actually got involved in helping us, helping some of the builders and the labourers doing the work for this clinic. So and he moved on, and I think he got better, and lo and behold, he's somewhere hopefully safe and well now. So that was 2010. That was a good memory. Then it's a bit of a blurry picture, this one, but this was then in 2015. It was Fleet Street. We opened up, prime location like the Canary Wharf site again, slap bang in kind of legal finance world area. Very desirable, good looking practice in a great location. I suppose now again, like Canary Wharf, it's probably quite dead up there. So I imagine you take the good with the bad, okay, in that respect. No one knew a pandemic was coming, but hey, that's life. And then Notting Hill Gate, this was back in 2017. We opened another clinic, slap bang on Notting Hill Gate. Great location, kind of much more urban. But again, a very successful practice when we exited back in 2018 from this site. Great spot. And so that was our evolution. So these were 5 practices of our own that we built and created over a number of years. So we've got a lot of experience in doing that, and we've done that countless times, and in truth we've enjoyed it very much so. So tonight's webinar, I will talk about the current environment, the demand to start up your own practice, why now I think it's a good time, how to raise the money Dan will talk about, the approach of setting up a practice, the many ingredients to setting up a practice, and then some kind of things that you can consider that maybe we can help you with further down the line. So let me crack on. Let me just make sure this is all working all right. Okay, we've got a great number of people. We had over 160 people registered for this webinar tonight. So I can see there's a real strong demand out there. So what we're seeing is there's no doubt a strong demand for people wanting to buy a practice at the moment. We have lots of people wanting to buy practices, but truth be told, it's an interesting market. People are registering, people want to buy a practice, but no one knows whether the valuation's right or wrong, okay? And in particular, people are starting to think, well, do I want to buy a practice or should I just start up a practice? And I think certain reasons why that's happened now. I think there's certainly some uncertainty over the NHS. So contracts, whilst the NHS is still paying the money at the moment, will that go on after 12 months from the pandemic? Your guess is as good as mine, but in talking to lots of people, there's certainly some nervousness about what will happen with the NHS. So hence people are thinking, should I do my own clinic? In addition, there's obviously uncertainty over the impact of the pandemic. Now, I know private practices are doing very well as a result of this pandemic, because lots of patients can't get in to see an NHS clinic. So where do they go? To a private clinic. Our own clinics are performing well. I know other clients' clinics are performing well. So certainly there's a demand for people to say, you know what, I've had enough being an associate, whether it's NHS or private, I'm going to do my own thing. In addition, another reason that I personally think is when you start up a clinic, it's not that expensive to do it. To buy a quality clinic these days costs hundreds upon thousands of pounds, okay? But you can actually start up a clinic on a relatively tight budget if you do it properly and carefully. And I'll come on to that shortly. But also recently, from the 1st of September, there's been some changes in planning laws. So before you needed to have D1, now D1 sits into a class called Class E, which effectively means A1, A2, C class and D class all fall under D. So if something's A1, technically that can be a dental practice now. So that's changed the kind of landscape somewhat. So where there was a restaurant, potentially, can be a dental practice without really much hassle. You just need to get confirmation from local planners if that's okay, and off you go. In addition, personally, I think more and more dentists, hence we've got such a number of people registered for this webinar tonight, are seeking their own security and the opportunity to control their own outcome. This pandemic, if I've seen anything, is that people don't want to be at the behest of someone else. They want to be able to control their own outcome, I think, increasingly. And hence the desire to open up your own practice or to have your own practice, I think has grown significantly, certainly amongst dentists that I've spoken to. In addition, even prior to this pandemic, we saw the bank of mum and dad being a real supporter of associates wanting to buy their practices. So I've seen many associates who've worked at a practice or working for a few years, and right before their eyes, they saw the values just shoot up. And I think that means kind of it's given an opportunity where people who are trying to buy a practice, they cannot find a practice, and because they're outbid by someone else, or corporate buys it, or so they're having to outbid and pay over the odds. But I think some degree of sense maybe returning to the market, and people might be thinking, you know what, I don't need to expose myself financially that much. What about a startup? Let me look at a startup. It's lower financial exposure, and it's the opportunity to create your own value. Okay. Certainly, I know if we can do it, many other people can do it as well. It's not as straightforward as people think. It's a lot of hard work and tension, stress, and all the issues that come with any old business, but it's doable. Personally, I think there's certainly a potential risk with NHS practices. No one knows what's going to happen next. My guess is as good as yours. But if you read between the lines, I think lots of people are thinking, well, the cost of running such NHS dentistry has gone up as a result of COVID. Can it be funded? Is this an opportunity for the Treasury to say, you know what, we're going to change the goalposts? Personally, I think that could be something that could happen over the next year or two, or maybe even shorter, but this is just hypothesizing on my side. But I suppose the bottom line is, and this is something that always sticks in my mind, if you are running predominantly NHS clinic, your main client is the NHS. If that client changes its mind, decides to do something differently, you're kind of pretty much dead in the water. So whereas if you're in private, you have lots of customers, lots of patients, and if one patient decides to go elsewhere, you've got plenty of others. So it's a risk management issue, and my view is that as a business person, as an investor, that type of thing, risk management is the key to me. Am I going to lose my shirt if the NHS pull the rug under me in that respect? And that's why I think there's increasing demand for private startups. In addition, people who are associates, I think NHS associates, even prior to the COVID, were being commoditized at a general UDA value. I think private associates, certainly there's more demand for private jobs, and so the pay levels for associates were certainly falling prior to COVID, and I think even now, as a result of COVID, a good associate will retain, and who generates well will be retained at a decent pricing level. But associates who perhaps don't generate as well and may not fit into the team as well, their percentages are dropping. So I know I've seen the list. There's virtually a large proportion of associates on this webinar tonight wanting to think, okay, how can I take control of my own destiny? So now, why now? Are we crazy to set up a practice now? Why, Christ, we're still in the midst of a massive pandemic, and it looks like we're going into further lockdown and tier 2, tier 3. And where we are here, I'm sitting in Elmbridge today, and I'm currently living in London at the moment. It's all tier 2. So it means there are restrictions in place. Will it go to tier 3? I don't know. But the bottom line is, this pandemic will end at some point, okay? Hopefully sooner than later. And I think it's a great time to start up a practice, because when you start up in these tough times, if you can get through these tough times, you'll make hay during the good times. So as I mentioned earlier, planning laws have changed. So the availability of sites is certainly increased. You can look at any high street anywhere. There's plenty of empty units. So that's an opportunity for you straight away to think, okay, could I do a dental clinic there? And would that work for the patients I want to offer my services to? Private practices are busy, okay? Especially talking to clients I've spoken to, and I know from our own clinics, despite changes in PPE, fallow time, and changes in practice, why they're busy, mainly because NHS practices won't or cannot see patients, or are limited to what they can do and see. So I certainly think that is an opportunity, because no one knows exactly, as I said earlier, about what's going to happen with the NHS. So there's an opportunity as a private practitioner to offer your services to patients in your local area, wherever that may be. So isn't this not a great opportunity to start now whilst patients want your services? I think it is a great opportunity. I think people want quality care. They were fobbed off during the pandemic when the lockdown was there. People had pain, people had issues. They want service, they want care. And I think now is a great time to do that. So why set up a practice as opposed to buying a practice? And I'm not going to talk anything about buying today, but why set up as opposed to buying? Well, in my mind, there are various strengths to this. That there's you start with a clean slate. It's certainly an opportunity to do something different. It's considerably lower cost in terms of investment. I guess you can be very creative, and you can choose how you do it. You can build that team, and the team is critical. And ultimately, you can create value relatively swiftly. If you do it right, you can build your goodwill relatively quickly, from zero up to something significant quite quickly. Obviously, there are weaknesses or concerns or issues. You don't have any patience. You need to be much, much more commercially minded. And you have to be patient, and you have to be willing to try and experiment. And I suppose one thing that isn't written on this slide is you need to have that mental strength and tenacity to cut through and keep pushing forward. I will come to that shortly. Now, when you do a practice startup, in my mind, you're building an asset from the beginning. When you buy a practice, you're buying an asset already that's there. And when you're buying a practice, the question you have to think is, can I add value to my business? Okay. Or can I add value to the business that I'm buying? Whereas when you're starting up a practice, your value is relatively low. So to add value to something that's got relatively low is actually a lot easier. So when you set up a clinic, you may spend anything between 150 and 250 on a setup. And that's a lot lower than buying many practices that I see in the market today. It certainly requires a mindset of an entrepreneur, one that will require you to build a business from scratch as opposed to taking over from someone else and filling their shoes. So you have to have that entrepreneurial spirit and be willing to spin a lot of plates, potentially break a lot of plates, but keep the plates that are spinning well, continuing spinning. Now, what are the essentials for a successful startup? And this goes back to experience I've seen over the years. Certainly clarity. You need to be clear on what you want to create. If you don't have that clarity or vision of what you want, don't do it. So think hard and be clear about what and who and how, and you're going to do it. Another really important aspect is you need to be very careful with your budget. And the word frugal comes to mind here, especially during a pandemic. You don't need to go out and buy the latest kit, the latest technology. Yes, you might need certain bits of it. Of course you do. But spend on only what is needed. Don't be tempted on the latest gadget. I think that's a real learning point. I suppose lots of clients I've known have seen and done. And I've seen that the salesman will always try and sell you something you don't really need, especially when you're doing a startup. And this goes back to that first clinic we set up. When we opened up our first clinic, we opened up 2 rooms. As I said, only 1 room was needed. So be careful. Location is very important. Now, as a result of this pandemic, would you open up in the city centre of London or Manchester or Birmingham? Maybe not. We don't know when people are going back to work. Maybe that's not the right angle. You will know your area much better. Maybe being in the suburbs is better. So you need to be, but at the same time, you need to be visible. So you have to target the right profile of patient you're trying to cater for. Design is really important. How it looks, how it feels, and when I say design, I mean branding as well. Is it inviting to the patients and the team to come to? Team, again, I cannot advise how strong and important. Get the right team. The team, you'll have effectively 2 teams. One team to help you open up the clinic, i.e. builders, designers, accountants, lenders, banks, brokers, everything, lawyers. But then you'll have the team who's going to help you run it, and they're a different team. And so you need to make sure you build that team. The team is everything. And if I can give you 18 years of my experience, not the only thing that matters, but one of the most important thing is finding that right team that you can work with and you can trust and work together with. And then I suppose in today's age, digital marketing. When we started out back in 2004, digital marketing was relatively new. I remember building our first website on Microsoft front page and doing the pay-per-click ads on Google and making a pretty good success of it, actually. But since then, a lot has happened over the years. In our team alone, we have digital marketing people, content writers, social media people, video people, you name it, everything, okay? And that's so important today if you're going to stand out from the crowd. So these are just things that come to the top of my mind and the essentials for a successful startup, and for a successful setup. And I haven't even written on this slide, but I suppose that the really important aspect is then you have to obviously make sure you deliver damn good care for your patients. If you don't do that, what's the point of doing it? You can do all these great things, but if you're not providing good dentistry, or you have problematic, or you provide care that isn't of a sufficient standard, then it all goes to waste, really. So one of the questions I always get is, what about the return on investment? So it's a difficult one to answer, but I'll give you an example here. Assume you have 100,000 of your own money and you borrow 80. So the cost to build is about 180. Assuming after 3 years you build a turnover to about 250, your loan of 80 is now 60. Okay, it's dropped, fallen amounts because you've been paying some capital amounts off and interest off. Assuming you sell the practice at 250, and I'm being very conservative here, less to 60k, you've created value of about 190. So your 100k is turned into 190. It could be a lot higher, but I'm just trying to highlight here that it's doable. Obviously this is all hypothetical, but quite often or not, when you do a startup, you might be still working elsewhere as an associate, maybe 1 or 2, 3 days a week. And in the evenings, you go and work at your new clinic and you build it up that way. Different ways to skin a cat, but there are lots of ways of doing it. But the return is certainly there for those who are willing to put the effort into it. I've listed here a ton of ingredients that are really important for a successful practice. How you structure it, the legal issues, the planning, how to interview staff, cash flows, you name it, marketing, pay-per-click, SEO, you name it. There's so many things that have to be considered. So as you can see, these are 40 plus ingredients for a successful practice. I'm sure there are more now, and CQC and all these things that have to be considered. So it's not a straightforward exercise, I have to stress, but it's achievable if you work with people who know what they're doing. So going back to the emotional side or the personal side, who should start up a dental practice? Well, in my mind, and having seen people who have been successful over the years, the first skill is that they're certainly determined and they're a driven individual. They want to succeed, they've worked hard, they've got to a certain point in their career, and they are determined to have their own place. They want their own independence and their creativity. They certainly have some business savviness, maybe not a lot, but some, but they have good people skills and good leadership skills. In my mind, that's the type of person who needs to, or who probably would make who would make a success of a startup. If you you think you don't have those skills, or you feel you lack in those, perhaps you're not the right type of person to do a startup. But again, certain things can be learned. You can learn business savviness, you can learn leadership and people skills. But I think having that drive and determination is a really important aspect. And if you don't have that, put a question mark about it. Should I be buying a practice? Should I be opening a practice, or should I even be buying a practice? Maybe I'm best off doing what I'm doing already, maybe perhaps as an associate. So then this moves us on to the lending side of things. Now, Dan's gonna get involved here. I'm gonna do that. Hopefully this will work. Dan, you there?
Am I back on?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah.
I've moved the slide there. Hold on. So,
You're running too far ahead there, Aaron.
yes, sorry. So Dan's now. Let me explain to everyone. Dan's one of our commercial finance team. He works alongside Nigel, Julie, Sarah, Kathy. So we've got a great finance team, all made up of experienced people who used to work in banking. So they know how to borrow money. They know the pitfalls of going to a bank. They know how to get the best terms for clients. So if you are on the market to try and raise finance, whether it's to buy a practice, whether it's to set up a practice, whether it's to refinance a practice, whether it's to do asset finance, whether it's a loan for a tax loan, whether it's for property finance, you name it, actually, these guys are definitely people you need to talk to. So Dan, you take it away on financing your dental squat.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks a lot, Aaron. Yeah, basically, just sort of building on what Aaron said, really, is that there are lenders in the market that are very interested in helping people set up a dental practice. I suppose when you look at that slide there and you see 70%, loan to value, you may start panicking and think, oh, that's a large contribution. But like Aaron said, is that you can set up a practice for, 150 to 250,000. So although it's a 30% contribution, your contribution will be quite low. So at 150, you're looking about 45,000, where some of the practices are on sale for, say, £1 million or £500,000. So your contribution of 20% on £1 million would be £200,000. So if you put that into sort of context, actually starting up a practice makes sense, because you can get the practice you want for the right location, especially now with the changes in the D1 usage. You can find a high street practice that suits you. You can set the practice out how you want, and also you can find somewhere with very low competition. So instead of buying a practice where there may be a lot of competition at the moment and you're paying top dollar for it, you can set up your practice for a fairly low amount and get the right location that suits you. Can you just go to the next slide for me, please, if possible?
Sure.
Thank you. So what Arun was saying in terms of setting up a practice, most lenders would prefer you to have just a one surgery, because to start off with, it's going to take you a while to build that practice up from scratch. So there's no point having 5 or 6 surgeries fitted out and sitting there not doing anything. So most lenders, when they're looking at the finance, they want one surgery fitted out, the decon rooms, the staff rooms, etc. But that surgery fitted out, but with the other rooms plumbed in, ready to go for the next stage. You also probably be keeping your associate role to start off with. Lenders like that, because then you have another income stream coming into the practice. So that new business that you're setting up doesn't need to fund your lifestyle to start off with. As that practice grows, and also you can bring online the second, third surgery, then you can maybe look to reduce your associate hours. But it's about being sensible at the start and getting everything right and making sure that practice is successful. If from day one you're trying to take 100,000 salary out of that practice, it's not going to work to start off with. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Yeah. Okay. What all lenders fund? So they're going to look at the building costs. They're going to set up the surgeries, decon rooms, obviously equipment. They're quite happy to do that. This can be done a mixture, really. Some lenders will be happy to do the building costs, etc., with a normal loan, and they may also want to do the equipment via like an asset finance. So we can blend that, and depending on what you want to do, really. See reception areas, staff facilities, computers. They can also, within the business loan, include some marketing, because that's what to start off with. You need to market that business to let people know you're there in the local area, and we can also help in terms of marketing. We've got a marketing team, like Arun said, is that if marketing is not the thing that you're very good at, we have a marketing team who can help you and assist you with building that up. Yeah. Okay. And what do the lenders need to see? So to start off with, they need something called a personal profile form. All that is really just a breakdown of your income and expenditure and your assets and liabilities. That just gives the bank a flavour of, what sort of assets you've got sitting in the background. If you've been an associate, they normally like you to be an associate for like 3 to 4 years. So in terms of that, you should have built up some assets to sit in the background. Last 3 years associate accounts. What they want to see there is that you have grown a certain amount of income for your practice where you currently work. If you've only done 10k worth of gross over the last few years, then, and you're saying I'm going to go into this new business and gross 200,000 straight away, the bank may sort of question that. But if you can demonstrate over the last 3 years that you've been grossing well, and within your projections you can show that this is what you can gross, then the bank's more likely to believe them figures are correct. 3 months personal bank statements. That's just so they can understand what your income and expenditure is again, and they normally sort of tie that into what you've said on your personal profile form to see if it tallies up together. And business plan projections. They want to know what the plan is for the business. With banks, they need it sort of set out to them, where you're going to be based, the reason you've picked that area, and what you're looking to do. The projections, because they haven't got any other figures, very important for a startup practice. They need to understand year one what sort of income you're going to be generating, what sort of profits. Year two, year three, how that business is going to grow within that timescale. We actually put projections together for clients. We've done it for about, I think, Aaron, is about 10 squat practices we did last year, roughly.
I think maybe nearer 15. I think down. I think
15 practices. But the reason we're quite successful in terms of marketing these to the banks is they're realistic. We see a lot of projections that come in from clients from day one where they're going to open this practice and generate, X amount of income from day one, which, when a bank's looking at that, is that realistic? Within our projections, it's a slow build. It's going to take a while to grow. The first month, 2 months, it's going to be a little bit slower. It's going to build gradually, 10%, 15%. By month 6, then you're going to start seeing repeat business coming back in. They're realistic figures that are running through the 12-month projections in the first year. A bank can actually rely on them without saying month 1 we're going to make 40k profit, month 2 50k profit, month 3 60k profit. They need to be realistic, and they need to have the assumptions behind them to say why they're going to be like this. Why are these figures reliable?
Can I just add something there, Dan? I think it's so important to get that right, because you only kind of get one stab at a bank really at this stage. Because if you present something that's over optimistic, they'll just laugh you out and say, oh, he doesn't really know what he's talking about, and go away. Okay. So therefore it's really important to make sure those projections are pretty well thought through and considered. Otherwise you've lost a bank or two straight away at that point.
It's the stuff behind it, isn't it? Not only the figures, but the assumptions in there, that it's all the detail that's behind them projections. That's what the bank wants to see, because when they're questioning it, they want to be able to go back and, okay, that makes sense, because they fact check everything when they're looking at these projections. CVs, like I said, most banks normally want about 3 to 4 years experience as an associate. They're not probably looking to lend to someone to start off with who's just qualified within the first 12 months. They just want to know that you've been a dentist for a period of time. It's important to add in a lot of management, sort of experience, or that you've taken on additional roles within the practice. When you're going to be starting up your own practice, obviously you're going to have to manage staff. You're going to have to deal with CQC. So they want to know that you've taken them roles on in your existing practice, and that you're not just going from being an associate and just going and doing the dentistry, and then suddenly, oh, how do I run a practice? What they want to know is that you've thought about the jump that you're going to be making to opening a practice, and that you've taken an extra responsibility so that you have that skill set to be able to manage and run a business.
Sure. So this is Dan. Any other points to add there? I've got something to talk about here, though. Just
no, that's fine for me, Aaron. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Dan. There's a few tips I've kind of added to Dan's from my perspective, because Dan sees it from a banker's and broker's perspective, and I'm kind of seeing it from a client's point of view, because I know I borrow money for our own practices, for example. Okay, so some tips that I've kind of put together here. Firstly, I think banks are certainly more careful in their lending. It's really important to keep your existing finances in order for at least 6 months before you put an application in. If your bank account looks poor, the bank's going to say, you know what, I'm worried about lending any money to those people. Certainly get an experienced accountant to go through the figures to work out if you did set up a practice or buy a practice, you could service the debt. So banks want you to make sure you're using professionals who know what they're talking about, whether it's accountants, lawyers, in that side of things. Also, banks don't always like you to buy the freehold. They feel they're too exposed to too much debt against one individual when you're starting out, when it's your first business or first acquisition or first setup. As Dan mentioned, management experience is really important. I mentioned this earlier, always make sure you use professional advisors, as I said, who know the sector. Don't get someone who's been dealing with vets to deal with your dentist. It's a very different sector. And then also make sure you use someone like Dan or Nigel or the team to raise that finance for you, okay? Because then you'll get the best deals, and they'll package it in a way. And the key is to package it in a way that makes it easy for the bank, and they like you. And Dan's job is to make sure you get the finance or have the best opportunity.
Yeah, I think the thing on that, Aaron, obviously being, I'm a broker now, but I used to be a relationship manager, and the relationship manager's got a lot of stuff to do. They're doing lending applications, but also doing meetings, service. So what they actually want is something that's very simple for them to read through, and then they can make a decision whether they want to move forward with that quickly. So like you say, if you can package it, and that's what we try to do, package it in the most simple way so that they know they can take it forward.
Because I think is it something like they only have 10 minutes or something to review the application.
You've got, yeah. I know in everyone's head there's probably about 6 managers sitting around discussing it for hours, but like I say, you've got about 10 minutes to make an initial discussion. Do you think that's one to take forward or not?
Yeah, so it's important to present it well.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a couple of questions that have just come in, which I will address right now, actually. In terms of, we talked about setting up a practice, and it's about 150 to 250 usually the range. That's not including buying any freehold, though. This is usually a leasehold, so you'd be renting it. In terms of buying the freehold, again, as I mentioned, the bank would support it, but you'd need to make sure you have sufficient collateral, sufficient cash to put into such a deal. So there's no real price limit for buying a property. It's just a matter of what resources you have behind you and what the bank's willing to lend you. And then another question is about the bounce back loan, which is a very relevant question, because people are saying, well, if you've taken out a bounce back loan, won't banks look at that negatively because potentially you cannot manage your finances during this COVID crisis? Well, I had this discussion with a bank manager very recently, and my view was, well, isn't it a sensible thing to take out a bank loan, a bounce back loan? Interest rates are very low. It's flexible. And in the event of things going a bit awry, you have those funds available too. So my view is, well, take the easy cash, cheap cash. That would be my answer to a bank.
A lot of people have taken them, and a lot of people have taken the bounce back loans, like you say, just for security, and have not used the funds. And they may pay them back eventually anyway. The money's just been sitting on that current account just in case,
Correct. Yeah, correct. And I suppose another question that's not really related to this, but whereabouts setting up a practice? Where should you set it up? Well, I think a residential area is certainly a good idea, depending on what type of residential area it is. And prior to COVID-19, a city centre would have been a good idea, but that's changed the whole game. Okay, I can't see people leaving their homes. Where will they go to next? They can't go back to the cities. Will they go to live in the countryside? Maybe, but ultimately, I think where people live is always going to be a safe bet to open up a clinic. So going back to the slides, so should you do a squat? I personally think it's an excellent time to start. You can negotiate hard on rental terms and hopefully find a very good location. You can build goodwill through providing quality care, whilst, in my mind, the NHS figured out what it wants to do with NHS dentistry. And whilst they're twiddling their thumbs, you have the opportunity to open up and set up your own clinic. And I think it really is a real creative side of things. When you're starting up your own business, you'll find new skills and ideas and thoughts, and that inner creative flair will come out. It's rewarding on many levels, personally, emotionally, financially, if done right. But as I said right at the outset, it's certainly not for the faint-hearted. You need resilience, you need emotional intelligence, and you need to have that ability to change rapidly as the patient requirements change. So you certainly need to be flexible. If this is you, then I would say a squat is definitely something to do, even during a pandemic, in that respect. Let me move on. So wrapping up here. So how can we help? There's two things primarily I'm just going to talk to you briefly about today. One is our boot camp, which some of you I know may have heard about. and it's a virtual boot camp these days. We've done it for the last 15 years. It's a 6-hour event, it's a what's it called? It's certainly a lot of information where we'll go into a lot more detail on how to set up a clinic in that respect. Let me just show you the slide if I can find it. Bear with me a second. So it's on the 28th of November. You can see a whole range of testimonials from lots of people who've been to it over the last 6 months and stuff. We're running this every 2 months now. You can check out this page. I will share this with you in a minute. Myself and Smita, my wife, will be talking about taking that step from associate to practice owner. I'll go into more detail on the market, current dental market. Nigel, my colleague, will talk about business, finance, forecasts. I'll talk about location and demographics. Smita talks about the team, and then I wrap it up with marketing, marketing tips, marketing ideas, seeing things that worked. It's £149. We do have people already booked on it. We do limit the number. So if you do want this to come, I'd certainly recommend you do that, okay, in that respect. So bear with me a sec. I will just send you the link on the chat. Okay, then another thing that we are doing is this here. It's a dental practice startup program. Again, we've done this for many years, where we've helped people through the process over a 12-month period. We only do it with a small number of clients, but it covers certain things. You get a space at a virtual bootcamp anyway. We help you source finance at a reduced rate of 0.75% as opposed to 1%. We help you with questionnaires to start thinking about how to build your practice. We do the business plan, we do the financial forecast, we do the cash flow forecast. We give you the full breakdown of costs. We introduce you to well-trusted advisors. We have a Zoom call once a month, and you get a discount on your accountancy fees as well once you open up. Dan leads this side of that part, this service, and that fee is £250 per month for 12 months. I will again share that to everybody there on their chat, so you can check that out. And then going back to the slides, bear with me a second. Where's it gone? Back to the slides. You can contact us at any time, myself on that email, Arun at Samera, Dan, or Nigel. We'd be delighted to help you get onto that ladder of owning a practice. I know there are a lot of people who are frustrated and want to have their own business, and I think now is a great time to do it. Personally, I think the demand for practices in the future is with us for the foreseeable future. More and more dentists want practices so they can control their own future. In very simple terms, I would say if you're thinking about doing it, save a decent lump sum of money and make sure you have a clean financial track record. Don't go out spending and burning your cash on fast cars and other such likes. Save that money for that practice. Sadly, you can't burn your money going on fancy holidays now, so you might burn it on a car or something, but I'd recommend you don't. And ultimately increase your skills, management skills, clinical skills, and help your team to improve theirs as well. And ultimately surround yourself with people who will inspire, push, and help you achieve your dreams. That's a really important aspect in anything in business. There is no right path, ultimately, but I know from experience that this path of setting up clinics, if you do it right, as we've done it many times, is a very, very rewarding path. But ultimately you need to take the action, okay? You can sit around and dwell on it and talk about an idea for many years, but if you don't take that action, what's the point of listening to this call or doing anything about it? And in my experience, the ones who are successful are the ones who've taken affirmative action and take control of their future. We only have a few weeks of this year to end, and I think a lot of us want this year to end, but let's make 2021 your best year, and you create your own dental practice. As they say, and as Eleanor Roosevelt said, The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. I hope that's given you a taste. I've been talking a little bit longer than I anticipated tonight for 50 minutes, but I hope you found it useful and interesting. I'll just check there's a few other questions. One question got here is, I note that you set up several squat surgeries, as you said earlier. What was your reason for not buying an NHS practice? Well, good question. My reason was risk management, to be honest with you. I thought, and I still do think, buying an NHS clinic, no one knows what the outcome's going to be, okay? And you're restricted in what you can do. Who knows what's going to happen with the contract? And ultimately, it's a return on investment. I could buy an NHS clinic, sure, I can get access to funds. We have a business that helps us raise money for people buying clinics. But my view as well, I think we can't be so creative with an NHS clinic. We can be that with private. And it's an exciting area to be in private care. I hope that answers your question. This webinar is recorded and it will be available to watch again. It will be on our YouTube channel as well as on a blog page on our website. But I would strongly suggest, if you haven't already, there's a whole raft of free videos on our YouTube page. So at Samera Business Advisors, you can watch a whole range of videos on how to set up and all these things if you haven't. And I hope you find it very, very useful. Let me just make sure I've answered all the questions. Okay, an interesting question. Do you think the government let down the NHS corporates? Well, I think it's too early to say at this stage. Lots of corporates are keeping their thoughts to themselves, but potentially they have. But personally, I think the writing was on the wall before this pandemic. How can you trust a government, especially this government? So I wouldn't go into. I'm not going to get too political now, but I think that's an issue to be considered. Okay, right. Well, thank you very much, guys. I need to get home and have some dinner. And if you've got any questions, please do reach out to us. And we'd be delighted to see you on our boot camp if you haven't attended it already. And good night from myself, and good night from Dan. Take care. Good night.
Good night, Brian. Yeah, thanks. Bye.
Dan, bye.